Did you know that the brutal practice of stoning was almost unheard of in pre-modern Islamic societies? So how did it become more common in recent times? In pre-modern Islamic societies, stoning and other harsh punishments were extremely rare. Islamic law placed strict conditions that made such punishments nearly impossible to enforce. Reviving stoning today would be as shocking as if Christians decided to bring back Old Testament laws like the death penalty for adultery or working on the Sabbath, laws long abandoned because they clashed with the principles of mercy and justice. So how did this practice, once so rare, make its way back into modern discussions? Today we're diving deep into the reasons behind it, reasons that not only most people, but even many Muslims are unaware of. In classical Islamic jurisprudence, or fiqh, the focus was always on balancing law with justice and mercy. Punishments like stoning required extraordinary levels of evidence, such as 4 adult eyewitnesses who directly saw the act of adultery. These conditions were so strict that stoning was almost never applied. During the 623-year history of the Ottoman Empire, for which there are countless court records, there is only one recorded example of a judge sentencing a convict to death by stoning. This ruling, on further analysis, was found to be outside the limits of the Sharia because sufficient evidence was not produced. The man that was convicted was a Jew, and the law stated explicitly that the death penalty for illegal sex was only to be applied to Muslims. Instead of stoning, judges typically relied on discretionary punishments known as ta'zir, which were far less severe. For centuries, Islamic courts emphasized fairness and compassion, ensuring that the harshest penalties were more symbolic than practical. But things changed in the 18th and 19th centuries with the rise of Wahhabism, a Puritan movement that rejected centuries of Islamic scholarship. Traditional Islamic jurists who balanced law with mercy were dismissed. Sufism, which emphasized spirituality and ethics, was condemned. Instead, Wahhabism pushed for a rigid, literalist interpretation of Islamic law. Harsh punishments like stoning, rarely applied in pre-modern times, became central to their vision of pure Islam. In Saudi Arabia alone, 4 people were sentenced by stoning in the span of only 12 years, between 1980 and 1992. But this raises a crucial question. If stoning was so rare and practically inapplicable in Islamic history, what caused its revival? The answer lies not in Islamic teachings, but in how colonial powers and their allies systematically dismantled Islamic societies. Wahhabism would never have gained the power it holds today without the strategic support of colonial forces. To weaken the Ottoman Empire's hold over the Arabian Peninsula, the British allied with the Saudi Wahhabi forces. For the British, this was a jackpot. Wahhabism's rigid, literalist interpretations not only fit perfectly with their goal of fragmenting Muslim societies, but also targeted 2 of their greatest adversaries, the Ottomans and Sufism. Tasawwuf, with its deep roots in spiritual resistance and community leadership, had long been a thorn in the side of European colonial powers. Countless Sufi leaders stood against colonial powers, leaving an indelible mark on history. Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi of Algeria, Omar al-Mukhtar of Libya, the Mahdi of Sudan, Omar Saidou Tal of Senegal, Samori Touré of Guinea, and Izzeldin al-Qassam of Gaza, whose legacy inspired the brigade defending Gaza today, were all Sufis who stood against European forces. But colonial powers did not stop there. They systematically dismantled the Islamic social institutions wherever they set up their administration, as a targeted strategy to disempower Islamic jurists. Waqf institutions, which were charitable endowments that funded scholars, enabling them to act independently as defenders of the oppressed and free from state control, were seized. Colonial rulers saw the autonomy of traditional Islamic scholars as a threat because prominent jurists not only stood against injustice, but also actively organized and incited rebellions. To resolve this, colonial powers in some cities massacred traditional jurists publicly to silence dissent and prevent organized resistance. The aftermath of the Mokrani Revolt of 1871 in present-day Algeria and the Kubkub massacre in 1917 in Chad serve as notable examples where several Islamic scholars were executed, imprisoned, or exiled, while religious institutions, including mosques and madrasas, Islamic schools, were destroyed or converted for colonial purposes. By destroying Islamic legal and social systems, colonial administrations cut off the structure and funding that produced quality Islamic scholars. Wahhabism, as an ideology on the other hand, served a different purpose for colonial powers. Its emphasis on reviving brutal laws such as stoning was convenient, as it painted a backward image of Islam, which fit perfectly into the colonial mission to bring progress to the Muslim world. With the Ottomans defeated, Wahhabism was given full control of Islam's two most holiest sites. The Saudi Wahhabi takeover of Mecca and Medina in the mid-1920s marked a significant shift after nearly 950 years of control by Sharifs. What's surprising is that most Muslims today are completely unaware that this transition was unprecedented in the region's history. Since the establishment of the Sharafat Makkah, or the Emirate of Makkah, in 968 CE by the Abbasids, four powerful Muslim empires, namely the Fatimids, the Ayyubids, the Mamluks, and the Ottomans have come and gone, while leaving Mecca and Medina in the hands of the Sharifs. However, the respect shown by previous empires did not deter Saudi forces from taking over. In December 1924, Ibn Saud captured Mecca, followed by Medina in December 1925, at the direction of their European allies. This effectively ended nearly 1,000 years of Hashemite rule over the Hejaz region. The effects of this takeover was nothing short of devastating. The aftermath needs a separate video on its own, highlighting the history of the movement. Miraculously, in 1938, another event occurred that would tip the scales for the Saudi Wahhabi alliance up until the present day. Oil was discovered at Dammam, near the Persian Gulf, by the California Arabian Standard Oil Company, better known later as Arabian American Company or Aramco. This discovery gave the Saudi Wahhabi alliance virtually unlimited resources and, with the support of Western powers, the ability to spread their ideology far beyond the Arabian Peninsula under the banner of Salafism. For the Saudis, this wasn't just about influence, it was also about survival. They understood that if their version of Islam remained drastically different from the beliefs of most Muslims, their hold on Mecca and Medina could be challenged. Using this newfound wealth, Saudi Arabia financed the construction of thousands of mosques, madrasas, and Islamic centers across Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America. They didn't stop there. Saudi funds were used to print and distribute millions of Qurans, often alongside Salafi Wahhabi-influenced books, pamphlets, and fatwas, all offered free of charge. To organize this effort, they supported global organizations like the Muslim World League and the World Assembly of Muslim Youth, UAMI, which became vehicles for promoting Wahhabi teachings worldwide. The influence of Salafi Wahhabism even reached movements like the Taliban. Saudi Arabia played a significant role in funding the Mujahideen in Afghanistan during their fight against the Soviet Union in the 1980s, embedding Salafi Wahhabi ideology in the process. This network of funding and influence ensured that the ideology would have a lasting impact, not just in Saudi Arabia, but across the Muslim world and beyond. This global outreach has allowed Salafi Wahhabism to distort Islam's image in immeasurable ways, marginalizing its rich diversity and erasing its spiritual and ethical foundations. The ideology even inspired terrorist groups who also follow strict interpretations of Islamic texts. Yet despite being vocal about human rights violations committed by extremist Islamist groups, Western powers, particularly the US and Europe, continue to provide unwavering support to the source of the problem. While these powers criticize the outcomes of extremist ideologies, they fail to take responsibility for their role in nurturing and sustaining the environments where such ideologies flourish. The rare practice of stoning, once nearly extinct, was revived not because of Islamic tradition, but because of the rise of Wahhabism, a movement supported by colonial powers and maintained today by Europe and the United States to weaken traditional Islam. This is a stark reminder of how outside forces and internal puritanical movements reshaped Islamic societies, eroding centuries of justice and mercy in the process. Let's not forget the nuanced history of Islamic law and the importance of understanding how politics shaped its perception today. If this made you think differently, don't forget to like, repost, and follow for more insights.